City Hall.
Thank you. Will you read the first item?
Item 1 is Director of Community Development regarding 126, 128, and 132 South Kenwood Street Stage 1 and 2 design. 1A is a motion approving Stage 1 and 2 design. B is a motion approving instrument imposing covenants on real property.
Mr. Ochoa. Mr. Garcia.
Ms. Van Meiden, yes. Good afternoon, members of the City Council and staff.
Thinkers to Evers to Chance.
We are requesting that this particular item be removed from the calendar. We are in receipt of information concerning the historical analysis of this particular property. It was evaluated for an urban infill exemption, but under CEQA, as you may already know, if we do receive information of potentially substantial importance that would call into question a conclusion as to the significance or non-significance of, in this particular case, a potentially historic structure, then we have to take a look at it. And, CEQA is a disclosure document, so that's what we're going to take a little bit of time to do, to evaluate the letter that we received from the Glendale Historical Society and make recommendation on the next and the best course of action to evaluate whether or not this project would create a significant impact were this structure to be demolished. So that's what we need to do. We need a little bit of time to do it.
And is that action mandatory or discretionary on the part of the council at this time?
Well, of course,
do we have to do it, or is it subject to discussion?
It's recommended that it be withdrawn to make this evaluation when there is a disagreement amongst experts as to the historical significance of a structure. That's when that matter needs to be more fully disclosed. And, of course, if you made the decision to approve it despite this recommendation, there may be some exposure to the council to a challenge for having made that decision.
Okay. Ms. Van Meiden, I have 2 speaker cards on this item. Would they be moot?
They would. We would continue the item and receive comments at the time that the item would be heard.
And do you have a date certain for the continuance?
We don't. We do not believe it will be a long continuance. We're in discussion right now to meet as soon as we can with the applicant to commence the process towards further evaluation, and we'll be coming back as soon as we have more information for you.
Okay. Therefore, is there a motion to continue item 1A and B?
Motion to take it off calendar.
Second. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Council members Devine?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Garpetian?
Yes.
Sinanian?
Yes.
Mayor Najarian?
Yes. We have no other items on this agenda.
And Mr. Mayor and Council, for the record, any correspondence that was received regarding this item, either directly to us or even ones that were directly to you but copied to us, we've made copies and provided that to you and staff.
Okay. Mr. Garbettian.
Yes, a couple of things. I'd like to ask the staff to bring us a report back as to how this process works, the historic designation. Because there are some language in this letter that I read that is questionable for me. As far as if there is a property that is built in an era, is that like in 20s or 30s or 40s, would that determine to be a historic property? I think I want to get a report as to what would make it a historic property, that there are criteria that we find 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5 as to how it's determined. Because just if I'm not talking about this case because I know we're not talking about this case at all, but if the property is old, does it mean it's historic? If it's part of an era, is it historic or not? Or the level of design, that the details in the property makes a difference or not? We would like to have a report as to how do we determine as a city if the property is. I know we have experts that they make a report one way or another, but as a city, I'd like to know how do we find the findings, if you will.
Sure, and we can put that together. We're working with planning staff And there's a couple of different issues. One is what's the process for designation under a local register. Another question, which I think we will probably answer as part of that because it's relevant to these types of proceedings, is how do you determine whether something's eligible and might be significant under CEQA criteria, which is the issue why we asked for the continuance on this particular matter. So we'll address those issues for you.
Right, because it says if there's we note that a CEQA review is also triggered when there is a disagreement between experts. Is it the case all the time? I mean, an expert can go and disagree with another report on every project, for example. I'm just asking. And that triggers the CEQA requirement?
There has to be substantial evidence. An expert opinion isn't a qualified expert opinion under CEQA unless it's supported by substantial evidence. And typically experts aren't just lay opinions, and therefore there's a definition of expert opinion within the CEQA guidelines and the public resources.
So it's not the opinion of the expert only. There has to be a substantial evidence.
It has to be based on the evidence in the record.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Thank you.
Ms. Devine?
And when we get this final decision or final evaluation, will it be the final decision, or will we still have to look at both sides? And, in other words, will the decision whether it's significantly historic or not, these properties, will that be made when this report comes back to us?
It depends. It depends on what the finding is, whether or not, for example, if the staff, after looking at the matter, determines that it's not potentially historic, or there's not substantial evidence of a fair argument that's historic, it still comes before the council. But at that point, depending on what the analysis says, our office, along with staff, may be saying this is what we think the result is. In the circumstance where the determination is that it is historically significant under CEQA, or that there's differing opinions at that point, and then an EIR is prepared, at that point the council as the decision maker then can make the choice whether or not to move forward with the project on the historic issue alone. But we'll put all the options together for you so you can kind of see what the roadmap is on that.
Okay,
I
thank
have
you.
a question. This is being pulled because we just received, I guess from the Glendale Historic Society, a sort of a windshield survey analysis that was filed with the state of California, Department of Parks and Recreation. So my question is, was this part of the Glendale Craftsman survey that the Historic Society did and that we did with them? Because we did a Craftsman survey at one point.
I know there was a Craftsman survey, and I know there was some analysis in there. That particular document you have was just filled out by the expert that was retained by the Historic Society. It hasn't been filed with the DPR yet, as far as I understand.
This was just completed? This wasn't done back as part of the Craftsman survey?
That one you have, I believe, is recent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I thought maybe it was part of it. But I would like to know when it comes back whether this was part of the Craftsman survey.
Well,
what
we'll
the
have that
analysis
information
was
for you.
At that point. Both properties.
Correct.
Without getting too much into the merits and the evidence, I would like to add to that request by Mr. Karpetian, let's be a little bit more comprehensive. Let's also lay forth the ground rules and the ordinance requirements that we've passed for historic districts as well. So you were talking about historical properties. Let's look at historic districts just as a reminder, as a refresher course, because it does get rather confusing with different standards, and they all sound a little bit similar as to what we're describing, just so we and the public have a clear understanding as to what we mean when we say and use a particular term or when we vote on a particular item.
Certainly.
Mr. Karpetian.
Also, I have one suggestion, because the developers or property owners, they are all the way to this point to try to get an approval, and then yet a letter comes in at the 11th hour, and we have to go back. And I think we need to have a part of our process to let them know when they're purchasing a property. Maybe they might have not purchased this property if they knew this was historic. I know the burden is on them, but in the beginning, to have a process to say these properties may be historic, so if you want to demolish it in the future, because they come to us, they say we want to demolish these buildings and build 20 units, 50 units, whatever the number is. I think in the beginning of this game or the process, we have to have information for them to say, look, this may be historic. Get your report done first before you even close your escrow. Because at this point, I don't know what a property owner would do. Not just in this case. I'm talking about overall. As after purchasing a property and getting a semi-green light that this may go forward because it's not historic, then you have a report as well, and it indicates it's not historic, but yet at the end of the day may be determined otherwise, thinking that we have to have it in our process to inform them that these things are coming and this may happen.
Well, we've been talking.
yeah.
I've been talking for years about doing a citywide historic survey, and that's something the Historic Society has been talking about for years. This is not a new conversation. In fact, we recently gave the go-ahead to do a commercial historic survey to at least look at commercial properties, and that was what the windshield survey of the Craftsman's properties was supposed to also help with, which is why I'm curious about what the windshield survey for these houses had said. But absolutely, we need to do a citywide survey so that property owners do know this upon purchasing properties. And that is something that has to be updated. You can't just do it once and say it's done, because as time goes by, more information is discovered, other resources disappear. So it's something that you really need to update every 5 years or so. So it's something that I would certainly would support funding, and it's something that we've talked about and I've talked about for the past 7 years. So I agree with you, Mr. Garpetti. We need to have a citywide survey of anything that's potentially historic so that we can flag properties and let property owners and buyers know before they purchase something.
Before we say anything more, are we okay discussing our issues at this point?
To the extent there were questions, I was okay, but if we're going to start getting into discussion about the merits of the survey, I'm going to be a little hesitant.
So questions only, but not a substantive.
I have a question. According to staff report, the survey was done in 2007. Do the real estate brokers have any information about these homes that are possibly historic that they can share with prospective buyers?
I think they do. I think they have. And in this particular case, a historic survey was done. I think the issue is the Historic Society believes it was either inaccurate, incomplete, or somehow less than what it ought to have been. Hence the conflict between the expert retained by the developer, who as a developer is coming in eyes wide open, understanding what all the risks are along the way, and the Historic Society, who has, as a vested interest, a desire to try to preserve as much as what they perceive as quality construction, quality buildings as they can. And we've come to a point where they're saying two fundamentally different things on a specific set of issues. And because we were having trouble reconciling that, the letter from the society came in, I think it was last night. So up until this point, we've been progressing with the information provided by the developer, and now we have to determine whether or not the information provided by the society holds water or not. And if it doesn't, then we will come back to you and move forward with the developer's application, much as it is today. Right. And so all that exists. That's basically what it is. No one has not done their work. It's just that two experts disagree on what the conclusion of that work is.
Right. But the fact remains that the real estate brokers do not have the information that they need to pass on to prospective buyers, that this could possibly be.
I would disagree with that to the extent that respectfully, that you have real estate brokers who understand what their clients' needs are, and the client, especially in this case as a developer, who has a vested interest in tearing down the property and building something else, are coming in eyes wide open. Yeah. So having a disclosure is not necessarily going to add value to the folks who are buying the property, because this is what they're doing for a living. There seems to be a fundamental disagreement as to what is there.
It's important to note that this applicant submitted a historic study as part of their application, knowing that it was going to be an issue that needed to at least be studied.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so we did have our motion to continue, and there's nothing else on the business agenda for this special meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we are adjourned.